My name is Mary Catherine Vance and I'm 35 years old. I own a specialized laboratory where I formulate medical-grade skincare for burn victims and post-operative patients. It's a business I built from nothing, using my background in organic chemistry and every cent of my savings. I'm trained to work with volatile compounds and precise measurements, which means I know exactly how to stay calm when things get heated. But nothing in a laboratory prepared me for the sound I heard when I came home early that afternoon. My daughter was sobbing inside my own house, the kind of terrified cry that makes a mother stop breathing before she even understands why. I pushed the front door open wider and froze just long enough to see the truth. My father, Charles, was in my living room yelling threats at a child while my older sister, Rachel, was tearing through my home office like a thief who already believed she deserved everything she touched. Drawers were open. My safe, hidden behind the bookshelf, had its panel ripped off. Papers from my file cabinet were scattered across the hallway like autumn leaves after a storm. Someone had searched for the deed, the business incorporation documents, and the thick blue folder I kept locked away for a reason. For 1 second, the chemist in me tried to analyze the situation. Child first, safety second, evidence third. The mother in me wanted to scream. Instead, I stepped back into the shadow beside the hallway, pulled out my phone, and dialed 911 without making a sound. When the operator answered, I whispered, "My family broke into my house. They're threatening my daughter. Send police now." Before I tell you what they were really searching for, and why the sirens outside ruined far more than their afternoon, tell me, what time is it for you right now? Where are you watching from? And what's the weather like where you are? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The operator told me to stay on the line, and I did. Even though every instinct in my body screamed at me to rush into that room, my daughter Emma was only 8 years old. She was brave in the way children try to be brave when adults terrify them, silent, stiff, trying not to make things worse. My father, Charles, stood over her with one hand braced on the wall, blocking the hallway as if my home belonged to him. My older sister, Rachel, was in my office dumping cabinet drawers onto the floor and muttering curses under her breath. I heard the metal scrape of my filing cabinet hitting the wall, then the sharp crack of a glass award breaking, the one I had received for my research last year. "Tell me where your mother keeps the blue folder," Charles snapped at Emma. "Don't act stupid. You've seen it. You know where the TV papers are." Emma cried harder, her voice small and trembling. "I don't know. I promise." "She's lying," Rachel called from the other room. "Mary always hides things. Patent filings, contracts, bank papers. She thinks she's better than us just because she's getting famous. She's probably hiding the $1 million check they gave her." My hand tightened around the phone. I was still half hidden behind the hallway corner, and the operator could hear enough to understand I was not exaggerating. In business, as in chemistry, panic ruins the formula. I forced myself to breathe slowly. I checked Charles's hands. No weapon, but his rage was a weapon in itself. I checked Emma's distance from him. Too close. I checked Rachel's designer bag on my desk, which I could see through the open office door. It was heavy and open. My prototype formulas and my mother's pearl necklace, the one thing she left me that Rachel always coveted, were already inside it. That necklace had been left to me in my mother's will, along with a small share in the laboratory space I now occupied. Charles had always called it family property, even though the legal paperwork said otherwise. Rachel had always called it unfair, even though she had received her own inheritance, a substantial cash sum, and burned through it within 3 years on failed luxury boutiques and expensive vacations. For the last 5 years, my family had mocked my business. At every Thanksgiving dinner, Charles would ask when I was going to get a real job instead of playing with lotions. Rachel would laugh and tell everyone I was just a glorified pharmacist making expensive mud. They mocked the long hours, the late nights I spent over beakers, and the fact that I drove an old car so I could reinvest every dollar into my equipment. I had helped them more times than I wanted to admit. I paid Charles's property taxes twice when he claimed he was facing foreclosure. I gave Rachel money for a business consultant she never actually hired. I covered emergencies that turned out to be new furniture or club memberships. But 3 weeks ago, everything changed. A producer from a national business reality show had called me. They wanted my skincare line for a featured segment called America's Next Great Industry. It was the breakthrough I had worked 15 years for. The contract was in that blue folder. The appearance fee, the manufacturing deal, and the non-disclosure agreements were all there. I hadn't told them yet. I wanted to wait until the episode aired to surprise them, hoping, naively, that they would finally be proud of me. But somehow, Rachel had found out. And now I understood why they had waited until my lab schedule said I would be at a manufacturing plant 3 hours away. They didn't come to congratulate me. They came to corner my child and steal the intellectual property they thought they could somehow claim as family assets. Charles lowered his voice, but that made it worse. Listen to me, Emma, your mother is selfish. She's going on national TV and she's going to leave us all behind. If she loved this family, she would have shared that contract. If she doesn't sign the transfer for the lab rights today, we lose everything. Do you want Grandpa to be homeless? Emma whispered, please don't yell. I want my mommy. That was the moment something inside me went completely still. Not calm, but surgical. I had seen my sister's jealousy before, but this was a planned invasion. Rachel came out of the office holding a stack of my patent applications. Found the chemical compositions, but not the TV contract. She must have it in her car. Charles cursed, his face turning a deep, ugly red. Then we make her sign the power of attorney. If she wants her daughter to stop being scared, she'll sign whatever we put in front of her. The operator's voice came quietly through my phone. Officers are 2 minutes away. Are you safe? I whispered, I'm going in. I lifted the phone just enough to keep recording and stepped into the light of the living room entrance. I could see the whole scene now, my daughter trapped beside the bookshelf, my father pacing like a predator, and my sister holding the life's work she used to call mud. When I stepped into the room, Emma saw me first. The relief in her eyes was so sharp it felt like a physical blow to my chest. Charles spun around, his eyes widening. Mary, he barked, not with guilt, but with the indignation of a man who thought he owned the air I breathed. Rachel dropped a handful of my papers onto the floor, her face twisting into a mask of faux offense. There you are. We've been calling you. We had to use the spare key because this is a family emergency. Emma, come to me, I said. My voice was cold, the same voice I used when a batch of chemicals was at risk of exploding. Charles shifted as if to block my daughter's path. She's staying right there until we talk, Mary. You've been hiding things. Big things. National TV? $1 million deal? And you let your sister struggle? I raised my phone. Don't move another inch toward her, Charles. He looked at the phone, then at my face. Are you recording your own father? I'm recording a burglar, I replied. And a man who just threatened an 8-year-old. Rachel stepped forward, her voice rising in that high-pitched, manic way it did whenever she was caught in a lie. You psycho. You're always so dramatic. We're family. We were just looking for the documents that belong to the Vance estate. You used Mom's money to build that lab, so that TV deal belongs to all of us. I used my inheritance, which was legally mine, I said, my voice shaking with a rage I had suppressed for decades. You spent yours on a Mercedes and a trip to Ibiza. You mocked this business for 5 years. You called it a hobby until you saw the logo on a network press release. Charles took a step toward me, his finger pointing at my face. Careful how you talk to me. I raised you. You wouldn't have a penny if it wasn't for this family. You didn't raise me, I said, stepping forward so Emma could duck behind my legs. You used me as a bank. And today, the bank is closed. The sound of the first siren began to wail in the distance, echoing off the suburban houses. Rachel's face went pale. She looked at her bag, then at the door. Mary, tell me you didn't call the cops. I didn't just call them, I said, feeling the weight of 15 years of mockery finally lifting. I stayed on the line for 10 minutes. They heard everything. Charles lunged for the phone in my hand, but I stepped back, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was a large man, and for a second, the old fear, the fear of the father who demanded total obedience, flashed through me. But then I felt Emma's small hands gripping my shirt. "If you touch me," I said, "it's not just trespassing. It's assault on camera." He stopped, his chest heaving. "You're going to jail your own father over a small business that hasn't even turned a real profit yet?" "It turned enough profit to attract the biggest network in the country," I said. "And it turned enough profit to hire the best legal team in the state. You should start thinking about that, because the police are pulling into the driveway." Rachel scrambled to shove the patent papers back into her bag, her movements frantic. "We were just leaving, Mary. It was a misunderstanding. We thought you were in trouble." "The only person in trouble," I said as the blue and red lights began to flash against my living room walls, "is the woman holding my mother's stolen necklace and my trade secrets." The front door kicked open, and the cold reality of the law flooded into my house. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought the police arriving would be the climax of the nightmare. But as the officers began to separate us, I realized that Charles and Rachel had been planning something much worse than a simple theft. Deep inside Rachel's bag, peeking out from under the necklace, was a document I hadn't noticed before. It was a forged contract, already signed with a perfect imitation of my signature, attempting to transfer 51% of my company to Vance Family Holdings, a shell company Charles had set up months ago. They weren't just looking for my TV contract. They were trying to hijack my entire future before the cameras even started rolling. As the officer asked me to state my name and the nature of the emergency, I looked at my father and sister and realized that the mockery of the last 5 years hadn't been a joke. It had been a distraction. "My name is Mary Catherine Vance," I said to the officer, my eyes fixed on the forged document. "And I want to press every single charge possible." But as the handcuffs clicked shut on Rachel's wrists, she looked at me with a grin that made my blood run cold. "You think you won, Mary? Check your business email. We didn't just come for the folder." My heart skipped a beat. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling as I opened my professional inbox, fearing what I would find waiting for me there. My thumb hovered over the screen, the blue light illuminating the sheer panic in my eyes. The email was from Apex Media Group Legal Department, and the subject line was a death sentence for my company: urgent, discrepancy in product certification and immediate suspension of broadcast segment. I felt the air leave my lungs. This wasn't just a threat, it was an execution. 2 years of 80-hour weeks, 6 figures of my own savings, and the reputation of my medical-grade skincare laboratory were being dismantled by a single click. I looked at Rachel, who was being escorted toward the patrol car by Officer Williams. She didn't look like a woman in trouble, she looked like a woman who had just won a bet. "What did you do, Rachel?" I whispered, the words barely audible over the sound of the police radio. She paused by the door, turning her head just enough to give me a jagged smile. "I didn't do anything, Mary. I just shared the truth. You always told us your lab was high-tech and perfect. I just told the network the truth about your secret ingredients. Maybe if you hadn't been so greedy with the inheritance, I wouldn't have had to find a way to make my own profit." Charles, my father, was already sitting in the back of the second cruiser, his face a mask of stubborn indignation. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Emma. He looked straight ahead, still playing the role of the victimized patriarch. I didn't have time to process the betrayal. I had exactly 12 hours before my segment on The Morning Pulse, the biggest national morning show in the country, was scheduled to air. If I didn't fix this now, the segment wouldn't just be cancelled, my brand would be blacklisted before it even launched. I turned to Emma, who was standing by the kitchen island, her eyes wide and wet with tears. I knelt in front of her, taking her small hands in mine. "Emma, look at me. Everything is going to be okay. I need to handle something for work, and then we're going to have a quiet night, just us. Do you think you can be my brave girl for just a little bit longer?" She nodded slowly. "Is Grandpa going to jail because he was mean to me?" He's going to the station because he made some very bad choices, I said, choosing my words carefully. But he's not coming back here. Not tonight, not ever again without my permission. You are safe. I called my neighbor, a retired nurse named Martha who had always been a second grandmother to Emma, and asked her to stay with her for a few hours. Once Emma was settled, I grabbed my keys and my laptop. I didn't go to a hotel, and I didn't stay in that house. I went to the only place where I felt I had any power left, my laboratory. As I drove through the quiet suburban streets, the irony of the situation burned in my chest. For 5 years, my family had treated my business like a hobby. At Christmas dinners, Charles would ask, "How's the little potion shop going, Mary, still wasting that medical degree on face cream?" Rachel would laugh and tell her friends I was finding myself by mixing lotions in a glorified garage. They never saw the clinical trials. They never saw the 3 a.m. sessions where I was analyzing molecular structures to ensure our medical-grade serums actually penetrated the dermis instead of just sitting on the surface. They never saw the certifications from the Board of Dermatology that I worked myself to exhaustion to earn. To them, I was just the younger sister who had gotten lucky with a small inheritance from our mother, an inheritance they felt belonged to the Vance family as a whole. When I pulled up to the lab, the sleek glass building looked like a fortress in the moonlight. I let myself in, the security system chirping a greeting as I entered the sterile, high-tech environment I had built from nothing. I sat at my desk and opened the full email from Apex Media. Rachel hadn't just sent a tip. She had sent a series of photos she'd taken months ago when she'd borrowed my office key to drop off a birthday card for Emma. The photos showed open vats of raw materials, but she had digitally altered the labels to make it look like I was using industrial-grade chemicals and banned fillers. Attached was a forged confession signed with my name, stating that my clinical trials were fabricated. It was a masterclass in sabotage. She knew the network's legal team would have to freeze the segment. They couldn't risk the liability of promoting a fraudulent medical product on national TV. I reached for my phone and dialed the producer of The Morning Pulse, Sarah Jenkins. It was 10:30 p.m. I knew she'd be at the studio or the hotel, preparing for the 6 a.m. call time. "Mary?" Sarah's voice was cold. "I was just about to call you. Our legal team is in an uproar. These allegations, if even 10% of this is true, we're not just pulling the segment. We're doing a lead-in about the dangers of artisanal skincare scams. My boss is furious." "Sarah, listen to me," I said, my voice vibrating with a calm I didn't feel. "The person who sent those emails is my sister, Rachel Vance. She was arrested 2 hours ago for breaking into my home and attempting to forge property transfers. I have a police report number, and I have the original, unaltered files for every photo she sent you." "Mary, the labels in those photos are photoshopped," I interrupted. "I am a CEO, Sarah, but I am also a scientist. I don't play games with my formulations. I am sitting in my lab right now. I'm going to start a live-streamed video call with you and your legal rep. I will walk you through every VAT, every batch record, and every certification on my wall. I will show you the raw materials and the digital footprint of the photos my sister sent you. I have the metadata to prove they were edited." There was a long silence on the other end. "You have 30 minutes to get your legal team on a call, Mary. If you can't prove this is a hoax by midnight, the segment is gone, and the scam story goes live." I didn't waste a second. I called my lead chemist and my tech specialist. Within 20 minutes, we were all on a high-definition video conference with Apex Media's legal team. I felt like a surgeon again, precise and clinical. I showed them the security footage of Rachel in my office months ago. I showed them the original photos on my cloud drive, where the labels clearly showed high-purity hyaluronic acid instead of the toxic chemicals she had edited in. But then, the legal rep for the network threw a curveball. "This proves the photos were faked, Dr. Vance." "But what about the Vance Family Holdings contract? It says here you transferred 51% of your intellectual property to your father, Charles Vance, 3 months ago. If he owns the majority of the company, he has the right to pull the product from the show. And he just sent us a formal cease and desist." My heart stopped. I looked at the document they shared on the screen. It was the same forged contract I had seen in Rachel's bag earlier that night, the one I thought the police had secured. But they had sent a digital copy to the network hours before the break-in. They hadn't just tried to steal my property that night, they had already planted the explosives in my professional life. Charles had been so confident that I would fold once I saw the police at my door or the segment in jeopardy that he had already started acting like the owner of my life's work. "That signature is a forgery," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous level. "And I can prove it." I was in a board meeting in Chicago on the date that contract was supposedly signed. "I have 20 witnesses, flight records, and a hotel receipt. My father has never stepped foot in this lab's boardroom." "We need more than that, Mary," Sarah said, her voice softening slightly but still professional. "If there's an ownership dispute, we can't air the segment. It's too messy." The small business angle was supposed to be a feel-good story. "This is a Shakespearean tragedy." "It's not a tragedy," I snapped. "It's a crime, and I'm going to give you the best feel-good story you've ever had." "You want retention? You want a segment that people will talk about for a decade?" "We don't just talk about the skincare. We talk about the truth. We talk about what happens when a woman builds something so successful that her own family tries to burn it down out of spite." I could hear Sarah's breathing change on the other end. She was a producer, she lived for conflict, for the real story behind the brand. "Mary Catherine Vance," Sarah whispered. "Are you saying you're willing to go on national TV and tell the world your father and sister tried to hijack your company?" "I'm saying I'm going to show the world that my business isn't small anymore," I replied. "It's big enough to fight back. I'll provide the police report, the arrest records from tonight, and the metadata proof, but in exchange, I want the full 10-minute slot. No fluff. No potion shop talk. We talk about medical-grade science and the cost of success." "I have to talk to the VP," Sarah said. "Stay by your phone." I sat in the dark lab for what felt like an eternity. I thought about Charles. I thought about the times he told me I was too ambitious for my own good. I thought about Rachel, who always wanted the lifestyle I worked for but never wanted the calloused hands that came with it. They thought I was the same little girl who used to cry when they mocked her grades or her hobbies. They didn't realize that every mockery had been a brick I used to build a wall they could no longer climb. At 1:15 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Legal cleared it. You're on at 7:15 a.m. The car will be at your lab in 4 hours. Don't be late, Mary. The world is going to be watching." I didn't go home to sleep. I spent those 4 hours preparing. I pulled the batch records for the serum we were featuring, a product I had named Emma's Light during the prototype phase. I practiced my talking points, but I didn't focus on the skincare. I focused on the truth. When the black SUV pulled up to the lab at 5:15 a.m., I looked at my reflection in the glass door. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a CEO who had just survived a war. As I climbed into the back seat, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from an unknown number. I opened it, and my stomach turned. It was a photo of emmaschool.no text, just the photo. My hand shook as I realized the nightmare wasn't over. Charles and Rachel were in custody, but they weren't the only ones who wanted a piece of what I had built. My father had friends, debt collectors and business associates he had promised a cut of my company to. And they were clearly losing patience. "Driver," I said, my voice tight. "We need to make one stop before the studio. And I need you to drive fast." I dialed the one person I knew could handle a threat that wasn't just legal, but physical. My former head of security, a man I had let go months ago because I thought the small business didn't need that level of protection. I was wrong. My business was a target, and my family had provided the map. "Victor?" I said when he answered. "It's Mary Vance. I need you at Emma's school. Now. And I need you to stay there until I'm off the air. I think someone is trying to use my daughter to stop a national broadcast." The stakes had just shifted from my reputation to my life. As we sped toward the television studio in the heart of the city, I looked at the sunrise hitting the skyscrapers. Within 2 hours, millions of people would know my name. But as I walked into the green room, I saw a face I didn't expect to see. It was my father's lawyer, a man named Marcus Thorne, known for being a shark. He was sitting on the sofa, a smug look on his face, holding a tablet. "Dr. Vance," he said, standing up. "So glad you made it. We have a small matter to discuss before you go under those lights. If you say one word about my client or his daughter Rachel on that broadcast, I have a file here that will end your career before the first commercial break, and it has nothing to do with fake ingredients." I stepped closer to him, the smell of his expensive cologne making me nauseous. "You're late, Marcus. The police already have the forged contracts. Your clients are in a cell." "Oh, I'm not here about the contracts," Thorne said, tapping the tablet screen. "I'm here about your medical license. Did you really think we wouldn't find out about what happened during your residency? The incident in the OR?" I felt a cold sweat break out on my neck. It was a ghost I had buried years ago, a mistake that wasn't mine but one I had taken the blame for to protect a mentor. "My father told you," I whispered. "Your father cares about the family legacy," Thorne lied. "He wants you to sign the 51% transfer now. Right here. In exchange, this file disappears. You do the segment, you talk about your little shop, you give him the majority, and you stay a licensed doctor. If not, well, I hear the medical board is very strict about surgical negligence." I looked at the clock. 6:45 a.m. I had 30 minutes. My daughter was being watched by a stranger, my family was in jail, a shark was threatening my license, and the producer was calling my name for hair and makeup. I leaned in, inches from Thorne's face. "You tell my father that he forgot one thing about surgeons. We don't panic when things get bloody. We just get to work." I snatched the tablet from his hand and threw it into the trash can. "Get out of my green room. You're making a mistake, Mary," he called out as security ushered him toward the exit. "You'll lose everything." "I've already lost my family," I muttered to myself, turning to the mirror. "There's nothing left to lose but the fear." As the makeup artist started dabbing foundation over the dark circles under my eyes, she whispered, "You okay, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I've seen a lot of them tonight," I said. "But I'm about to give them a funeral." My phone vibrated. A text from Victor, "I'm at the school. Emma is safe. No one is getting near her. Do your thing, boss." A wave of relief washed over me, followed by a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline. I walked onto the set, the bright lights blinding me for a moment. The cameras were being positioned. The monitors showed that the Morning Pulse logo. Sarah Jenkins approached me, checking her headset. "You ready, Mary? We're going live in 3, 2. The red light on camera 1 blinked on. The host, a charismatic woman named Brenda, smiled into the lens. "Welcome back. Today, we have a story of innovation, science, and the grit it takes to build a brand from the ground up. Joining us is Dr. Mary Catherine Vance, the founder of Vance Medical Skincare." "But Mary, I hear your journey to this stage wasn't exactly a smooth one, especially in the last 24 hours. I looked directly into the camera. I knew Charles was watching from a screen in the precinct. I knew Rachel was watching. And I knew that every person who had ever mocked my small business was about to see exactly how big it had become." "That's right, Brenda," I said, my voice steady and resonant. "Before we talk about the science of skincare, I think we need to talk about the cost of building a dream when the people closest to you are the ones trying to wake you up." The control room went silent. I could see Sarah Jenkins behind the monitors, her eyes widening. I wasn't following the script. I was writing a new one. "Last night," I continued, "my own family broke into my home. They attempted to steal my trade secrets and forge documents to take control of my company because they saw a small business as an easy target for their own greed. They didn't see the thousands of hours of research. They didn't see the commitment to safety. They only saw a dollar sign. The host was stunned, but she was a pro. That is an incredible revelation, Mary. Are you saying there's a legal battle for the very products we're looking at today? There was, I said, reaching for the bottle of my lead serum. But the battle is over. Because today, I'm announcing that Vance Medical Skincare is no longer a private family entity. As of 5 minutes ago, I've moved the majority of my shares into a protected trust for my daughter and a foundation for women in STEM. No one can hijack this company ever again. Not even me. It was a lie, I hadn't filed the paperwork yet, but saying it on national TV made it an inevitability. It was the ultimate checkmate. If Charles or Rachel tried to claim the company now, they would be fighting a public trust, not a lone woman. I spent the next 8 minutes explaining the science of the serum with a brilliance I didn't know I possessed. I talked about molecular weights, clinical trials, and the skin barrier. I was no longer the potion girl. I was the authority. When the cameras cut to commercial, the studio was electric. Sarah ran up to me, grinning. The social media numbers are exploding. Mary, you just became the most talked about person on the internet. Everyone is Googling the Vance break-in. Our servers are lagging. I stepped off the stage, my legs feeling like lead. I walked back to the green room, needing a moment of silence. But when I opened the door, Marcus Thorne was back. And he wasn't alone. Beside him stood a woman I hadn't seen in 10 years. She was dressed in a sharp navy suit, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. Dr. Helena Thorne, Marcus's mother and the woman whose career I had saved in the Or all those years ago. Mary, Helena said, her voice like gravel. We need to talk about what you just did on that stage. You think you protected yourself, but you've just opened a door you can't close. Your father isn't the only one who has been watching you grow, my dear. I felt the room tilt. Helena? What are you doing here? I'm here to tell you that the incident Marcus mentioned wasn't just a threat, she said, stepping closer. The patient from that night, the one who recovered? He didn't. And his family just found out that you were the one who signed the surgical report. I felt the walls closing in. The victory on the stage felt 1,000 miles away. My family had been the distraction. This was the real war. Who are you working for, Helena? I asked, my voice trembling. It's not my father. He doesn't have the reach for this. No, she said, a cold smile touching her lips. He doesn't. But the competitors you just embarrassed on national TV do. You shouldn't have made it personal, Mary. In this industry, personal is just another word for vulnerable. I looked at the trash can where I had thrown the tablet. I realized then that my small business had just entered the deep water, and the sharks were a lot bigger than my sister Rachel. I reached into my pocket and felt my phone. A new message. Not from Victor. Not from the lab. It was a photo of the trust documents I had mentioned on air, but they were already marked void. How? I whispered. You're a brilliant scientist, Mary, Helena said. But you're a terrible politician. You forgot that in the Vance family, even the dead have secrets. And your mother, she didn't just leave you an inheritance. She left you a debt you haven't even begun to pay. I stood frozen in the green room, the cheers of the studio crew echoing in the hallway, realizing that the TV appearance wasn't the end of the story. It was just the opening act of a much darker play. My name was Mary Catherine Vance, and I had just realized that my family hadn't been mocking me because I was small. They had been mocking me because they knew exactly how much I was worth, and they were never going to let me be free of it. Helena Thorne walked out of the green room with the same clinical coldness I had seen her use in the hospital corridors a decade ago. I stood there, the silence of the room ringing in my ears like a shell blast. The void stamp on the digital image of my daughter's trust wasn't just a technicality, it was a declaration of war. My phone buzzed again, a frantic notification from my lab's security system. Motion detected in the restricted cold storage wing. My heart hammered against my ribs, that was where the proprietary formulas for the Vance Bioserum were kept. I didn't wait for the production assistant to come back for my microphone. I ripped the transmitter off my waistband, dropped it on the velvet sofa, and ran. I burst through the studio exit into the cool New York night, my mind racing through the surgical checklist of my life. Triage. Threat assessment. Immediate intervention. Mary. Wait. It was Sarah, the show's producer, breathless as she caught up to me at the curb. The ratings are historic. We have 3 major retailers calling the station's front desk wanting to buy your entire inventory. You can't just leave. I have to, I said, my voice tight. The retailers will have to wait. Someone is trying to dismantle my life in real time. I hailed a cab, my fingers flying over my phone screen. I tried to call the lab, but the line was dead. I tried to call my home, where Emma was staying with a trusted nanny, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic, the old enemy I had fought in 1,000 operating rooms, tried to claw its way up my throat. I forced it down. Breathe. Think. Act. I finally got through to my lead chemist, Marcus, not Marcus Thorne, but my loyal lab manager. Mary, the police are here, he whispered, his voice shaking. But not for a break-in. They have a warrant from the FDA and a court order from the Thorne Group. They're claiming our medical-grade certifications were forged. They're seizing the batch records, Mary. All of them. Don't let them touch the stabilization logs, I barked. Those are proprietary. And Marcus, check the signature on the warrant. Who is the complainant? There was a long pause, the sound of paper ruffling. It's not the Thorne Group directly, Mary. It's Charles Vance. And Rachel Vance. They filed a joint affidavit claiming you used family resources and stolen medical data from your father's old practice to start the company. They're claiming they are the rightful majority shareholders. I closed my eyes for a second, feeling the bite of a betrayal so deep it felt like a physical wound. They hadn't just broken into my house for jewelry, they had been hunting for the research notes I'd kept from my days in residency, notes they now intended to claim were family property. When I reached the lab, the scene was a nightmare. Bright blue police lights reflected off the glass facade of Vance Laboratories. My father, Charles, was standing on the sidewalk, looking every bit the wronged patriarch in his Sunday suit. Rachel was beside him, her arms crossed, a look of smug satisfaction on her face that made my blood boil. You should have signed the papers when we asked nicely, Mary Catherine, Charles said as I stepped out of the cab. You thought you could go on national television and pretend you built this alone? Every cent you earned belongs to the Vance name. We're just here to collect the debt. You're destroying the company, Dad, I said, walking right up to him. The FDA won't care about a family dispute. If they freeze these batches, the temperature-sensitive enzymes will die. We'll lose millions. You'll be collecting a pile of trash. Then I guess you better start negotiating, Rachel sneered. We've already talked to Helena Thorne's lawyers. They're willing to buy the Vance Lab patents for a very generous sum, enough to set me and Dad up for life. All you have to do is admit that the research was collaborative and sign over the CEO chair to Dad. I looked at them, my own flesh and blood, willing to burn down a decade of my work just to spite me for succeeding where they had failed. They weren't just mocking my business anymore, they were trying to lobotomize it. I'm not signing anything, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous level. And you forgot one thing about surgeons, Rachel. We don't just cut. We debride. We remove the rot so the body can live. I pushed past them into the lab. The officers inside weren't local police, they were private security hired by the Thorne Group, acting under a civil seizure order. I knew the law. They could take records, but they couldn't stop the machinery without a specific safety injunction. I went straight to my office and locked the door. I needed to see that void document Helena had shown me. I pulled up my encrypted cloud backup. My mother's trust. I looked at the fine print, the part one had read 1,000 times but never truly understood until now. My mother hadn't just left me the apartment shares, she had left me a silent partnership in a medical research firm that the Thorne Group had acquired through a hostile takeover years ago. The debt Helena mentioned wasn't money. It was a non-compete clause. My mother had unknowingly signed away the rights to any medical innovations produced by her or her direct heirs in exchange for the trust fund that paid for my medical school. I sat back, the weight of the trap settling on me. If I stayed a surgeon, the clause was dormant. But the moment I started a medical-grade skincare line, I became a competitor using Thorne-owned intellectual property. My family hadn't discovered this on their own. The Thornes had found them. They had used Charles and Rachel's greed to bait the hook, and I had swum right into it by going on TV. I heard a heavy knock on my office door. "Mary, open up," Charles's voice boomed. "The lawyers are here. It's over. You can't fight the Thorne Group and us at the same time. Think about Emma. You want her to grow up with a mother in prison for fraud?" I didn't answer. I was looking at the original surgical report from 10 years ago, the one Helena said I had signed. The patient, a senator's son, had allegedly died of complications. But as I scrolled through the scanned files of my own career, I found the discrepancy. The signature on the final post-op report wasn't mine. It was a digital forgery, a crude one, placed there by Marcus Thorne when he was still an administrator at the hospital. They weren't just threatening me with the past, they were hiding their own crimes in it. I grabbed my laptop and a hard drive containing the raw data of my bioserum. If they wanted a war, I would give them a scorched earth policy. I dialed Victor, my attorney. "Victor, I need you to file a countersuit for corporate espionage and RICO violations against the Thorne Group, and I need a restraining order against my father and sister, effective immediately, citing the police report from the break-in." "Mary, that will take days to process," Victor warned. "They're in your building right now." "I don't need days," I said, looking at the security feed. "I just need 10 minutes of chaos." I stood up and walked to the lab's intercom system. My voice echoed through every hallway, every clean room, and out onto the sidewalk where the investigators were loading boxes. "Attention all staff and authorized visitors," I said, my voice calm and professional. "This is CEO Mary Catherine Vance. Due to an unauthorized breach of our stabilization protocols by outside parties, I am initiating a Level 4 biohazard lockdown. All exits are now electronically sealed. The air filtration system will now begin a sterilization cycle. If you are not wearing a pressurized suit, I suggest you stay very, very still." It was a lie. There was no biohazard. But the Thorne security team didn't know that. Outside, I saw Rachel and Charles jump back from the windows in terror. Inside, the inspectors dropped the boxes they were carrying and scrambled for the doors, only to find them locked by the security software I controlled from my desk. In the confusion, I watched the monitors. Marcus Thorne was there, hidden in the back of a black SUV, watching the lab. He looked panicked. He didn't want a lawsuit, he wanted a quiet acquisition. I picked up my phone and called the one person who could end this. Not a lawyer. Not a cop. "Dr. Helena Thorne," I said when she answered on the first ring. "I'm looking at the forged signature on the Miller case from 10 years ago. I'm also looking at the security feed of your son's team currently committing 3 different felonies in my laboratory. You have 5 minutes to pull them back and have my father and sister removed from my property, or I'm sending the high-res file of that forgery to the medical board and the press." The Vance break-in was just a local story, Helena. Thorne medical fraud will be global. "You wouldn't," she hissed. "You'd destroy your own reputation by association." "I'm a trauma surgeon, Helena," I replied, watching through the glass as Charles tried to scream at a security guard who was now too scared to listen. "I know how to amputate a limb to save the life. I'll sacrifice my reputation to bury you. Do you want to find out if I'm bluffing?" The silence on the other end lasted for an eternity. Outside, the black SUV began to move. But as I watched the Thorne team start to retreat, I saw Rachel do something I didn't expect. She didn't run. She walked over to the lab's main power override, a box I had forgotten to secure in my haste. She looked at the camera, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. "If I can't have it, Mary," she mouthed, "no one can." She slammed the emergency fire suppression lever. A split second later, the ceiling erupted, not with water, but with chemical foam designed to smother electrical fires. It was a death sentence for the lab's delicate equipment. In seconds, millions of dollars of research, my life's work, and the very serum that was supposed to save my company, was being drowned in white sludge. I stood in my office, watching the screens go dark one by one as the phone hit the servers. I was the CEO of a company that was currently dissolving before my eyes. My sister had just pulled the trigger on the family business she claimed to love. I walked out of my office, the smell of chemicals filling the air. I didn't look at the ruin. I walked straight to the front door, unlocked it, and stepped out onto the sidewalk. Charles and Rachel were standing there, breathless. Rachel looked triumphant. Charles looked horrified. "There," Rachel panted. "Now you're just like us, Mary. You have nothing." I looked at her, then at my father. I felt a strange, cold peace. They thought they had destroyed my business. They thought the small business was the building, the machines, the bottles. "You're wrong, Rachel," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. "The lab was just a shell. The formulas? The clinical data? It's all encrypted in a server you don't even know exists." "But thank you." "Thank you?" Charles stammered. "For doing this in front of 6 security cameras and 20 witnesses," I said, pointing to the crowd that had gathered. "You didn't just ruin a business. You just committed a first-degree felony of industrial sabotage. And since I'm the selfish sister you hate so much, I've already decided, I'm not dropping the charges this time. Not for family. Not for anyone." As the actual sirens, the real police this time, began to wail in the distance, I saw the realization hit them. They had spent their lives mocking me for being small. Now, they were going to spend the rest of their lives realizing just how big the hole they dug for themselves truly was. But as I turned to walk away, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. * check on Emma. The lab was just the distraction. *. The cold peace vanished. I looked at the black SUV speeding away, and I realized the war hadn't even begun. Mary Catherine Vance was about to learn that when you play with sharks, they don't just go for your heart, they go for your home. I didn't wait for the police to finish their report at the lab. I drove like a woman possessed, my heart hammering against my ribs as I dialed my home security team. "Is Emma safe?" I screamed into the phone. The voice on the other end was calm, professional. "She's with us, Mary." A black SUV tried to pull into the driveway, but we triggered the perimeter lockdown. The police just intercepted them at the gate. Relief washed over me so hard I nearly pulled the car over. My sister and father hadn't just tried to drown my business in foam, they had attempted to use my daughter as a bargaining chip for the formulas they so desperately wanted to sell, but they forgot one thing. I wasn't the little girl with a hobby anymore. I was the CEO of a medical-grade skincare empire. By the time I reached my driveway, Charles and Rachel were already in the back of separate patrol cars. Rachel was screaming about family rights, but Charles just looked at the ground, finally realizing that the small business he mocked had the resources to bury him. The fallout was swifter than any of them expected. Because the sabotage involved chemical suppression systems and industrial servers, it wasn't just a local dispute, it was a federal matter. And then, the story broke. 3 weeks later, I stood in a studio in New York under the bright lights of a national morning show. The segment was titled Resilience in Research. The interviewer looked at me with genuine respect. "Mary Catherine Vance, you built an artisanal lab from nothing, survived an attempt to destroy your life's work, and you're still standing. What's your message to other female founders?" I looked directly into the camera. I knew Charles and Rachel were watching from their holding cells. "People will mock your small business because they are afraid of how big you might become," I said. "They will call you selfish for protecting your boundaries. But remember, a business isn't just bottles and machines. It's your vision. And no one can sabotage a vision they aren't smart enough to understand." By the time the segment ended, my website had crashed from the sheer volume of orders. My small business was now a household name across the country. I went home to Emma, who was drawing a picture of a giant glass building with my name on it. I sat beside her, finally at peace. What would you do if the people who were supposed to love you tried to steal the life you built? Would you walk away, or would you fight to show them just how big you can be? Tell me where you are watching from, what time it is for you, and if you've ever had to protect your dream from your own family. I'm curious to see how many of us are building empires in the silence. Thank you for following my journey. This is Mary Catherine Vance, reminding you that your value is never defined by those who want to see you fail.